after a cancer diagnosis. Actually getting your head to catch up with physically what's going on takes ages.
I'd like to welcome Bami, Hannah, Peter and Ewan to this discussion about the importance of mental health when living with cancer. This is a really important topic for us at Maggie's and one that we know comes up so often in our centres. Bami, Hannah, Peter and Ewan have all lived with cancer in different ways and are probably experts on the subject of managing mental health when living with a diagnosis. So hopefully this is going to be a really interesting discussion. Bami witnessed successive breast cancer diagnoses in her family, from being a teenage carer to her late mother, to being diagnosed with breast cancer herself. She uses her experience of the illness to inform her work in helping others as an author, a coach, and a speaker. Ewan was still at university when he learned his brain tumour had become cancerous. He's very used to, in his own words, living with a statistic over his head. And he's used his work as a research student to pioneer new forms of art therapy aimed at helping cancer patients. Hannah is the head of adolescent services for a London council. She was diagnosed with advanced cancer during the height of lockdown last year and has had to navigate diagnosis and treatment during wave after wave of restrictions. And Peter supported his wife Alison from her first treatment in the early 1970s through 47 years and up until her death last year. As a former GP, he's a unique perspective on the delivery and impact of healthcare and communities and over a long period of time. The topic I'd like to start on is this. How true would you say it is of your experience that the mental challenge of having cancer, coping psychologically, has been harder than the physical impact of treatment? And Bami, are you okay to start?
Yeah. The thing is, the cancer club is one you don't choose to be in. And in my case, because I'd undergone risk reducing surgery before they now found the cancer where it didn't show up on the mammogram, it was seriously shocking. So dealing with the initial shock was one thing, but then having to come to terms with the side effects and all of that stuff, and especially if you're very independent and very strong and all of those things. And when you're the person that everybody around you calls to speak to ask for opinions, then it gets to the point where you realize that you need to speak to somebody. Coping with all of that initially was really a big challenge. And I don't know what I would have done if Maggie's was not available to me. And I always say this, that Maggie's has been at the core of my thriving journey.
You talk about thriving in your work. It's about more than just surviving. You know, what does it mean to thrive?
Yeah, the thing is, like, you know, the predominant cancer narrative is that of survival. And then if you think about one of the meanings of survival is just merely existing from one second to another and all of that stuff. And, you know, there's this thing, I wouldn't quote her, I probably wouldn't quote her accurately, but, you know, the late Margaret Jenks, that not to lose sight of living because of the fear of dying. Because for me, I believe that regardless of your prognosis, for as long as you're breathing, you're here. And whilst there are things that might be outside of your control, you can still live well. And living well, thriving, is different for everybody. But it's because we don't talk about it often enough, because the predominant narrative is that of survival. Just get through that treatment for them to say, okay, well, we don't need to see you for a couple of years. We don't need to see you for 6 months. And then what? You know, and of course, when it comes to loved ones, you put on your makeup, you go to work, everybody thinks, oh, yeah, you should be okay. At least you're not dying, you know, and then it almost becomes like people tell you to be grateful, right? But it's one thing to be grateful. It's another thing to say, okay, you know what? I want more than this. I want more than just merely existing. I'm feeling like I'm dying on the inside, even though I have everything looks great on the outside. So, yeah.
I saw that the Maggie quote about not losing the joy of living and the fear of dying elicited a few nods from you, Hannah, and Ewan and Peter. Hannah, I don't know if it's why it's particularly apt or feels relevant to you?
No, because I think it's very true that, and I think the biggest problem I have had is the fear. And the fear comes and goes depending on how I'm doing with treatment, how I'm doing with things. And I think when I was first diagnosed, and I've said this before, physically, I went, they go to that appointment, so I go to that appointment, go there. My head back there is going, cancer, cancer. How have I got cancer? How's that happened? And actually getting your head to catch up with physically what's going on takes ages, because it's traumatizing. And I think after a cancer diagnosis, I think you are traumatized. I think it's terribly scary. You think you're going to die no matter what stage, I suspect. I mean, mine is advanced, but I thought I made myself very anxious, very ill. I was lucky, one of my close friends, really early on, and I'd never heard of Maggie's because none of my family had cancer, so I've never really experienced cancer particularly before. I said, go to Maggie's. She had known the one in Manchester. She said, go to Maggie's, see them. So I rang Maggie's really early, and they were brilliant, because within a day I was in, and they were ringing me, they were ringing my partner, we both had counselling, and we did that. I've got progression more recently. I've rung them again, and they've been really supportive, and they've always checked in with me. And I think it's how you get your mental health to be able to thrive, because what you want to do is sit and just smile and feel happy. And feel content, and actually you have to change your expectations in order to do that. Saying to somebody that somebody did a really good analogy of steps, and actually just looking at a stair at a time. Just look at the steps, don't look at the staircase. And I think that's really huge. It's a good way to thrive and enjoy your life, because you're just looking at the now. So yeah.
Ewan, and I don't know if there's anything there that rang true for you.
Yeah, no, there's so much there that rang true for me. And I think so much of the past 5 years for me has just been about this process of working out how to live with that fear of dying, and how to just process suddenly at the age of 21 coming right up against this sense that, you could die soon. And it's such an sort of unexpected, unfamiliar thing, particularly at that age. And when it first happened, I didn't have the sort of emotional, the mental resources to ask for help, to express what I was going through, to talk about feelings of vulnerability, of anxiety, of fear. And it was just this very gradual process, helped so much by Maggie's, that has led me to be able to think about the steps, focus on the moment, kind of extract the joy from the present and what I'm doing now, without constantly worrying about this sense of, will I be alive in a few months? And it takes a lot to get to that point, and there's still plenty of moments when I am struggling with that. But I think it was that, sense of, for instance, walking into a Maggie centre originally just to ask if they had hats to cover up my baldness when I'd lost all my hair from the radiotherapy. But suddenly I became aware of this whole other side of care, where they could help me to reach that point, and they could care for me sort of emotionally as well as trying to treat my symptoms. And that was such a crucial starting point in this process of working towards thriving and living in acceptance of the situation I was in.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess, Peter, for you, when Alison was first diagnosed, not only did Maggie's not exist, but I guess the whole modern idea of mental health wasn't really part of the discussion at all.
It wasn't part of the cancer discussion at all. And indeed, I mean, to start with, the consultants were a bit coy about saying that what Alison had was a cancer. That well, it's Hodgkin's disease, and so well, Alison, because she was at that stage training to be a medical librarian, and she was able to explore about all that. And then when she was coming out the end of treatment, she met me. And the fact that I was a medical student at the same hospital that she was being treated at was sort of incidental, because we didn't actually meet there. So there was quite a sort of obstacle to overcome, finding out that, well, actually, yes, this is a cancer. And at that time, it was pretty touch and go whether or not she would survive at the end of treatment. Certainly, if she'd had no treatment, she wouldn't have survived. And there have been 1 or 2 cases reported where people with a stage 4 lymphoma had actually survived and gone on to live reasonably healthy lives. So the first 4 or 5 years, we were just wondering, well, is she going to make it through that? Is she going to have any problem with relapse? And then, well, as time went by, there never was any relapse, but there jolly well was a lot of developing problems as a result of the treatment that she'd had. And there wasn't any particular support from anyone anywhere. It wasn't a thing that she or I felt able to really talk about in a lot of depth with family and friends, in a certain amount, but it was very much at that time, well, you're pretty lucky to have got through, and you've survived 5, 6, 10 years and more. Nothing to worry about, surely. But then as the years went by, there was more to worry about, but not particularly helped by the fact that none of the different specialties that she was involved with seeing really linked up or knew what other parts of the system were doing, and had no idea really about the potential late effects, partly I suppose because the treatment was so new, but also, I mean, they didn't have the sort of whole person approach to it. So if it wasn't anything to do with whether you've got any lymph nodes remaining, if you haven't got a hematological problem, well, you're just fine. And so we lived with long-term survivorship for 44, 45 years. Much of what we did and managed, we did ourselves with discussion between ourselves and discussion with a GP who, with the best will in the world, didn't really know or understand what was going on. And we not infrequently would have to say, well, this is happening. We think it might be helpful if Alison could see so-and-so about the problem that she's got now. And our GP was very helpful in that way, and we never had any particular problems there, but it was a rather strange situation that I lived with right through, in that not only was she my wife, soulmate, best friend, but I was also a GP, so had medical knowledge. And although of course, I wasn't ever actually her GP, I might just as well have been for the sort of input that I was often having to make and decisions that I felt needed to make. On 1 or 2 occasions when she landed up having to go into hospital, it was me who did the deciding. And latterly, in the last, I suppose, 8, 9 years, I was progressively more and more, as well as all those things, I was also her round-the-clock carer. It was absolutely wonderful when we were introduced to Maggie's by somebody who we met at a conference in Edinburgh about new treatments in lymphoma and leukemia. And we met this person there who said, we described our journey over many, many years and said, well, yes, it's all very well, but it would be quite nice if there was some sort of support outside just the 2 of us. And he said, well, I found Maggie's is really very, very helpful. And so we contacted Maggie's in Edinburgh, and our experience was wonderful, being introduced to Maggie's there and the hematology group that we belonged to for about the last 4 years or so of Alison's life. Then ongoing from when Alison died last June, the amazing support that I had both from initially from the centre head, Andy, and then from a bereavement group, which was facilitated by Maggie's, and we continue to meet. I think one of the big challenges that I had was the sudden transition from being carer and having Alison there and around and best friend there, to her not being there. I was no longer a carer, and there we were in the middle of a pandemic with all the kind of restrictions that there had been through much of that time, and very little physical meeting up with people at all, though I did meet Andy at Maggie's a few times. And I still haven't seen very many people at all since Alison died, and adjusting to solo life. But I mean, I couldn't thank Maggie's enough for the support that there has been there ongoing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you touch on the difficulties of managing during the pandemic. Hannah, you know, I wonder whether you'd be happy to talk about how lockdown and the pandemic placed extra difficulties on your mental health when you were going through such a complicated diagnosis and treatment.
And I think, yeah, I think part of the thing about it, because obviously I was diagnosed in June, July. Well, I knew in June that I'd got cancer. In July, it was confirmed it was advanced cancer. So I think in my head, the whole thing is just tied up together, lockdown and not seeing people, because I can't separate the two out. It always feels like that. And sometimes I think, actually, is this lockdown or is it cancer that's really impacting on me? One of the hardest parts has been that I've had a lot of news over the phone that's really bad news. Then people have said, you can come in and see us. Then I've had to argue to have my partner there when we've had bad news. A lot of the stuff I've gone by myself. And then what he gets is, or anybody else gets, is what I relay, which sometimes has a more negative focus depending on how I'm feeling about what's being said. And he doesn't have that reassurance, and he needs it as much as I do. He's living with this. He's living with me every day, so he needs to know what's happening and have some of the more positive thing. Actually seeing somebody is so much more positive, and them giving you a message personally rather than over the phone. When I got really bad news that it was advanced and that they were going to, they said that I'm inoperable at the moment, but what they were saying was that I was going to be operated on. They were looking at stoma for me. I didn't get the stoma because then they rang and just said, we need to get you in for chemo. It's really aggressive and it's advancing fast. And I couldn't hear what they were saying, so I had to shout for him because I just couldn't hear it, because I was so distressed by what was going on. I felt really poorly. I felt awful, and we just couldn't see people do that. My first chemo session, I went by myself. Charlie picked me up. So he's had to pick me up a lot, but I haven't been able to have anybody with me. And I look at people now, because sometimes people go in and you see them, and I get that it's probably because they need an interpreter, or or they're elderly. But I would have loved, because all my friends and family couldn't support me the way they wanted to. I'm not from London, you might be able to tell that, and so my friends and family are all elsewhere. So it's been very difficult because I've not been able to see them. We've got lots of WhatsApp groups, things like that, but I've not been able to actually see people, to hug people, to have people come and sit with us, and to have that support for both of us. And our life has changed dramatically. It would have changed anyway because of lockdown, but it's changed dramatically. And I think one of the hardest parts of that is Charlie's not ill, I am. So I have become a different person during lockdown, and he isn't able to. So seeing our friends gives him a release, because he's able to spend some time and have support from them as well. Because otherwise we're just sitting, at points it's felt like we were just sitting in a house talking about cancer with nobody there really. I think the good thing about Maggie's for me was it's always been open. I've been able to go in, because I think by the time I was diagnosed, they'd opened up again. I have had some oncology appointments that have been in person. As I said, I got progression when I went last week, but again, Charlie wasn't with me, and I was really upset afterwards. I came out and burst into tears because I was like that, because it was what I thought it was. I knew. What was lovely was I rang Maggie's last week, and and said I need support again, and I'm able to go in for that support now, which feels huge for me, because they said, do you want to do it virtually? And I thought, no disrespect to anybody, but I'm so bored of looking at people's faces on the screen. I haven't been able to go into work because I had to shield. I was really put out about being about having to shield and being vulnerable, clinically very vulnerable. But actually it means, I have a lot of relationships at work. I work in a caring environment, that's social work, that's what I do. And I haven't been able to get support of colleagues. I haven't been able to see them, they ring, or it's just different. And I think the pandemic, I can't imagine, there are people who've died during this pandemic from cancer. There's people who haven't been screened during this pandemic from cancer. There's a range of other things. And I can't imagine how that feels if you haven't been able to get the help you needed. I was pushed through and I was able to get some help, but actually having to do a lot of it by yourself and over the phone is it's not good for anybody, and it's not good for your mental health in any way, shape or form, because you're just, put the phone down and then you're sitting here like that going, wow.
Yes.
Talking about having to receive certain and difficult news by yourself and isolated, incredibly hard, but also living with uncertainty, talking about that question hanging over your head is, really difficult, prolonged uncertainty.
Yeah.
Ewan, it's something that, you've spoken about, living with that uncertainty, having received your diagnosis when you did. And you spoke about living that uncertainty as well during the pandemic, and how it had given you a different perspective on things.
Yes, well, it's strange, because sometimes it felt particularly difficult during the pandemic because, of course, there was just so much time to think. And one of the best coping mechanisms I've found has been to throw myself into things, to be busy, to be active, to spend lots of time with other people. But when I'm spending quite a lot of time with just myself and my thoughts, then that's when those damaging thoughts start to creep in, and inevitably, your mind goes to dark, difficult places. But then there was also an aspect where, I'd already had for several years this experience of living under uncertainty, of having to sort of take things very short term, and of never really feeling sure of what was around the corner. So I think in some ways that made lockdown easier at times, because it's that same process of just simply focusing on what you can do in the moment and not trying to plan too far ahead, and not becoming too attached to the future, to hopes, to things like that. So that was maybe a more positive aspect of it at times. But there was, I think being aware of being vulnerable during the lockdown made it quite a difficult experience for me, particularly because that marked me out from other people my age so much. So in terms of what I could do, where I could go, that was a very different thing to other people I knew. Trying to be part of a sort of student community at university was just impossible during that time for me. So in terms of how cancer can sometimes set you apart from other people and feel like quite an isolating thing, that definitely rang true during this time.
And Peter touched on something I thought was very interesting about the development towards a whole person approach, going from specialist to specialist who'd say, or if it's not a lymph node, then it's not my area. And seeing the evolution over time of doctors who are maybe more orientated towards treating the whole person. Bami, this is something you've spoken about a lot. How important is it that we include the psychological as part of that whole person approach? When we're talking about mental health, is it something that we should be thinking about when we think about treatment in a broader sense?
Look, if I had a megaphone, that's one of the things I'm shouting to people, seriously. And of course, once I'm ready to talk, I will talk. The thing is, like, at the end of the day, it's crazy to think that something as traumatic as a cancer diagnosis will hit your life and you're not going to be psychologically, mentally, and emotionally affected. It's mad. And then, of course, if you put in that, because this is one of the things, putting within that, whether you talk about issues that you have later on after diagnosis. So like I said, the last couple of months, my issues are still ongoing now, and I don't even know what it is, So basically, you might have like a couple of months or maybe even a year where it seems as if everything is on an even keel, and all of a sudden a curveball is thrown your way, whether it's loss. And over the last few years, in fact, last week, it was a friend's funeral as a result of cancer. And when you put all of that within the context of, like the loss of friends or loved ones as a result of cancer, and it's like your mortality is slapped in your face. You are reminded of your mortality, really. And the thing is, like, it doesn't matter how strong you are, it doesn't matter how positive you are, that is what it is. So I believe that it is a disservice to cancer patients that the psychological input is always like an afterthought. Because, like I said, if not for Maggie's, I don't know what I would have, what my journey would have been like. And the thing is, like, because we all have our backpacks, you see. So when you go to see anybody, so everybody has a backpack here. It's an invisible backpack. In my backpack, I've got the losses of my mother and my sister at the age of 46. I've got my diagnosis at the age of 37. I'm a single parent. And I want to be alive. I want to be well and alive for my daughter. I have a lot of friends I've lost. I cannot tell you how many funerals I've attended. So when they're making the psychological part an afterthought, I just think it's mad. And I think it is very short-sighted, because all of those things matter. Because I remember I was talking about the fear of recurrence, that sometimes you're able to push it away. Some of those things literally, they impact on you physically as well. Whether you're talking about insomnia, not being able to sleep because you are worried and everything like that. And of course, you have scan anxiety is a very real thing. I remember when my sister was alive, because as a cancer was advanced, a breast cancer was advanced, and it was like firefighting for most of the 5 years that she lived with it. So whenever there was a scan ahead, especially maybe like a PET scan or a brain, whatever like that, there's the anxiety that comes with that. And then now let's bring this horrid lockdown as well. I cannot imagine what it's like to go through cancer and not have the gift of touch. Because I remember there were times when my breast cancer nurse would just hug me. And to be honest with you, at that time, she might have been the only adult I would have hugged for like months, because I'm on my own, So all of the coping mechanisms of dealing with trauma have been pulled. It's like COVID-19 has just been like a rug pulled out from under our feet. So that psychological input, it is not optional. It should not be optional. And it should not be a postcode thing as well, because I can tell you now, the experience that I had and that my late sister had were very different. Even though she was being treated privately, I had better support because I had Maggie's in where I lived. She didn't have Maggie's where she lived, and the thing is, like, Maggie's is a wonderful, amazing charity, but there's only so much you can do. So that means that we have to talk about this whole mental health support, and it has to be part of the care package, not an afterthought.
Yeah, I think, yes, we've been talking about the anxiety that comes from uncertainty, and I was very aware right through the whole time, more than 40 years with Alison, that we lived frequently with uncertainty and anxieties associated with that. And intellectually, I knew that it was there, and that was just how it was. But it didn't actually make it necessarily any easier, nor did it make it actually any easier, and in some ways harder for being kind of involved in it professionally, because it was part of my professional life as well. Just because you happen to be connected with something in the caring professions doesn't mean to say that you've got all the necessary stuff to be able to handle all that. And I became well, really very aware when at last we crossed the threshold of Maggie's and the kind of support that we had there. It was certainly amazing, really, during the last few weeks, fortnight or so before Alison died, having the support on the side from Maggie's. When Alison didn't die from directly from having had a cancer, but the actual cause of death, well, it all happened because of what had happened 40-something years before. And it took me very much by surprise when it happened. And although I knew from a sort of medical training point of view that these things can happen, it still really hit hard, and it took quite some understanding. So I was very glad to be able to share that experience, that she should suddenly go right downhill and be dead within, well, she went into hospital. I had no idea that it was going to be the last time that I would see her at all sensible, because she became delirious and confused, and it was lockdown, and so I couldn't see her in hospital. I had one brief visit 2 days before she died, and then a couple of hours before she died, and that was it, and no one else at all. So once again, yes, I mean the whole person approach and attitude of mental psychological support that comes through Maggie's is a real lifeline.
Peter, you were saying about the intellectually understanding that something was the case, but emotionally it hitting you at another point, or it taking time to work through that. Yes. I mean, that seems kind of like something that you were saying yourself about, taking yourself from one thing to the other, but your head was back there.
Yeah. When I was diagnosed, honestly, physically, people tell you what to do and you go and do it, because physically you go, oh my God, and you're in panic mode, you're in crisis mode, you are fight or flight. You are absolutely going to do what they tell you to do because you want to survive and you want to live. And so you go, yes, I'll go there and I'll do that. Meanwhile, my head was somewhere else, absolutely, about how did I have cancer? And it still does that. I still wake up sometimes and I go like that, have I got cancer? How's that happened? And I'm quite stunned by it still, because it's still a shock to me. And I suspect that will never go away, ever. But I think it's what I find surprising, and I think probably lockdown hasn't, and my experiences in lockdown hasn't helped. But I think if you're looking at a holistic view of how you treat cancer patients, that we are so far from being holistic at the moment, it's unreal. If you want pain management, you go to your GP, you don't speak to your oncologist. I didn't know that. I was in lots of pain and I was trying to speak to one person, they were going to speak to your GP. So then I'm speaking to the GP, and then I'm having this round robin of things. My team is very good, but they're very busy. And I spoke to Alice. I found out how to get in touch with Alice now very easily, my nurse, but I couldn't get in touch with her for ages. And then by the time I did, she went through, do you need counselling? Do you need anything? I'd found Maggie's by then. I was okay. But I have said, I'm convinced that we were on the floor. We were absolutely on the floor, the pair of us. Everything was about cancer. It was depressing. We were stuck in the house together because it was lockdown, and it was awful. It was horrible. And we thought I was going to die. We both did. I stopped eating because I was so anxious. And actually, Maggie's pulled me through, because what they said was, you can live with stage 4 cancer. It doesn't mean I might die, but it doesn't mean I'm desperately going to die. And so let's not stop eating and killing myself before the time is due. But also that actually, there are ways of coping with it. You can live with stage 4. It's like diabetes. There's lots of things you can do. And actually you need to, lots of people live with uncertainty, and but it's a huge adjustment to live with uncertainty, and it's all about your head. And if you speak to your team, they're brilliant, but actually they're really focused on the medical side. They're very much focused on what's that. They're not focused on your head. And actually your head is a huge part of how you cope with your illness and how you make yourself better if you're going to be better. Because actually, if you are living in fear, that's damaging. And we all know how powerful the mind is. That is damaging to probably your prognosis. It's certainly damaging to your treatment and stuff. And actually, I do bounce back. I can be positive. I can have those moments. Maggie's got me through that. got me through that when we were on the floor, because I was anxious, I couldn't breathe. At one point, I had never had panic attacks in my life, and I remember having these panic attacks and just going, I don't want to die, because I thought I was going to die really quickly. And it's you know, it's really interesting that we haven't got that far when we're so far advanced in so many other things, and actually why we don't do a holistic approach and understand the importance of mental health support and put that in. But I've told so many people, because I know a lot of people now who've had the same diagnosis as me, and I speak to them, and people they're in bits, and I say, have you been to Maggie's? Have you got a Maggie's nearby? Have you got that? And actually people, because it's not suggested to them and they haven't been, and then they will go, and so many people have got that initial help from Maggie's. It's huge, because it pulls you through, and you know, you've got to learn to manage it, because it's your life. But yeah, it's not easy.
You know, you talk about coping and managing your head. Obviously, finding Maggie's is something that all four of you have found really beneficial. What has been the mindset, or the perspective, or the advice that you've heard, or the lesson that you remind yourself of that continues to help you, or has helped you in the past? You know, what, for someone who's watching this for the first time, who maybe hasn't been to Maggie's, or who hasn't necessarily had that support, what are the things that you've learned?
The thing is, like, you know what, this is just a personal one. So this is just my view. The day I suppose because cancer was the robe was already part of my life, had been part of my life for so long. When the bombshell was dropped in my lap, I made a determination that day, and I said, okay, you know what? Yes, you might be here, but you're not going to rob me of living. You're not going to rob me of who I am. And then I had to push past the whole my cultural view of, well, the cultural view of keeping quiet, strong Black woman, blah blah blah, and everything like that. I just thought, you know what, forget it. I would ask for help, but it was hard, because for me, asking for help as a strong woman felt like I'd failed, felt like my body had failed me. But of course, with therapy from Maggie's and everything like that, because that was one of the first things I needed help with, getting my head around the fact that having the diagnosis does not mean I've failed. And this is something I've said in everything I say to everybody, that it is not a sign of weakness to ask for help. It is actually a sign of strength. And that has been a key thing for me, because knowing when to just say, okay, you know what, pick up the phone, or go into Maggie's when I'm able to, that, look, guys, I need to see someone. That at the end of the day, there doesn't have to be anything special going on. And of course, when my sister died, because for me, that was the biggest shock of my adult life. So, and I didn't know, I didn't know what my future would look like without her in it, because I'd never imagined that. So being able to go and ask for help, and then making a decision that, okay, you know what, I'm here. There are people who can help me. There are people, and I'm fortunate enough, because I also work with Cardiff University and all of that stuff. So I'm fortunate enough as well that I have friends who are empathetic, who have the knowledge, and who are willing to listen to me, who are willing to hold space for me. And then the rest of it is then up to me to say, okay, you know what, I am here. Even if I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, I'm not going to allow cancer to rob me of enjoying today. And the other thing, because for me, one of the biggest things is about gratitude, because I was speaking to someone a couple of days ago, and the person was like, oh, you're always talking about gratitude. I said, yes. I said, because a lot of times it's easy to look at the things that are going wrong and be so consumed by it. Because if I'm consumed by all of the things that's going wrong, then I wouldn't be able to see any prospect of joy, of hope, or anything like that. So as much as possible, I have this thing that, okay, you know what, I am here. Through every setback, I am here. I'm here, and I'm going to choose to be grateful. So whether it means I write down what I'm grateful for, whether it's like being able to eat whatever I want, Yeah. Or, or sometimes being able, even in lockdown and everything like that, of course, I had to keep away from a lot of people, but being able to take pictures of flowers. So the other day I went out, and it was the first time I'd gone to a particular garden in over a year. So what did I do? I took pictures of flowers. And, like, it didn't cost me anything, but it made me happy that, okay, you know what? I'm glad that I'm still able to enjoy this. So as much as possible, I think that being able to think of things to be grateful for with respect to loss, I look at the loss of my sister, that, well, she was my big sister, she was my biggest cheerleader and everything. I'm grateful that I had her for the time I did, because the memories I have with her, nobody can take them away from me. They're like treasures in my treasure bank. So on days when I'm really down and everything like that, and I'm missing her like crazy, because for a whole year after she died, I will pick up the phone, because she was the one person with something, especially if I did something silly. She's the first person I'll pick up the phone and call. So for a whole year, I will still pick up the phone and go, oh, and then I'll remember. But I'll cry, yes, and then wipe my tears, and then I'll be grateful that I had her for the time I did. So it's about looking at the present and saying, okay, you know what do I have in the present? Whether it's people who love you, whether it's people who support you, whether it's being access to Maggie's or access to any sort of help, that's something to be grateful for. Because at the end of the day, none of us know what tomorrow holds, even people who do not have cancer.
Sorry, go on, you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that I agree so much, Bami, with what you said about learning to ask for help. And Maggie's was such a huge part of that for me as well. I think in a different way, I was also someone who was kind of programmed at the time I had cancer not to ask for help. As a young man, I think for a lot of people that is the case, that idea of being open about the fact that you're struggling, you're not coping, and you need other people, you need support. I think that just didn't come naturally to me at all. And I think a really important learning experience for me was when I started taking part in a men's group at Maggie's. And that was full of usually older men who were just so open, so honest about their vulnerabilities, who cried, who laughed, who faced what they were going through with amazing sort of dignity and courage and wisdom. But there was just no sense of that trying to sort of conceal their feelings of sadness or anxiety. And they were so willing to share those and to speak about those. And also they'd been so active in seeking help and in accepting that. And I think gradually through being part of that group and discussing these things, I learned how important it was to seek that help, but also how much other people and organizations like Maggie's could add to my life and enrich it. So I think in terms of what I've taken out of Maggie's, that was a huge part of that.
I was going to say, I think some of the stuff is that's really good about Maggie's is they understand. So nothing's daft. Nothing you say is daft. And I know I was particularly traumatized because I didn't look like this before I got cancer. I had blonde hair that was straight, which these are chemo curls because I have hair back now. But losing my hair was huge for me. And they were really lovely because everybody else was like, well, somebody said to me, and I liked this, you're better, what was it? Better alive than bald or something, better bald than dead, that was it. And which is a good phrase and probably true, but it was really traumatic and I was really upset about losing my hair. They said it might go thin and I was thought the one plus about having bowel cancer, not breast cancer, was probably I might keep my hair, but that didn't happen. But they were really lovely, and I think what they're able to do. I spoke a lot to Victoria. Victoria was really good as well when I first had treatment, because I was still trying to do my full-time job. I still wanted to do everything. I was still really struggling with the fact that my life was so different. And she just said to me, you're ill. The treatment will make you ill and you are ill and you have to accept that. And actually I hadn't, and she helped me to accept it and helped me to stop and sit back and do what we're all talking about and look at things thinking, I like hanging out the washing on the line. I know it's embarrassing, but I love it. I like the smell of fresh washing. It gives me pleasure. Those little pleasures. I watched bees a lot in the summer. I was drained. I could hardly move. I had a lot of chemo and I didn't feel very well. And I would sit and look at bees for hours and I would film them quite what I'm going to do with the film is beyond me, but, you know, I'm looking at these bees and they were really, you know, it was really therapeutic. But I think that was helpful because there's lots of practical stuff. I did the Look Good, Feel Better workshops. I did all that, you know, I did lots of yoga as well, which was really helpful because it's slow yoga through Maggie's. It's very much about breathing and being able to do that. I had the support, you know, I had the understanding when I lost my hair, actually how that felt for me, because they understood how it felt for me. And lots of other people didn't get that. And that was really nice. And it helped me too. Practical tips when I couldn't eat. Try eating little bits of things, eat little bits of hummus. So actually the advice and the support I got from Maggie's came in a range of different ways. And what was really nice is I was able to go there. I could sit in a corner and cry, or I could sit and laugh about stuff. And usually I'd go out laughing because they would move me around. And, you know, I was able to spot in my patterns when I knew I was going to be down. I would have counselling on that day and it would pull me around a bit because they would just reframe it, make me think a bit differently and make me, you know, and it's very easy when you had a diagnosis to really, it's a catastrophe. And if you're like me, you catastrophize things anyway. So actually, you know, you go to the worst outcome and they pull you back and make you look at it a different way. And what you go is actually, I don't know that is going to happen. I don't know that I'm going to be dead soon. I don't know that. Actually, what I do know is that I've got every opportunity with the treatment probably to live a decent life, but I have to look at how I do that. So I think that's what really helped me, Maggie's.
You know what? I cannot talk about Maggie's without talking about the space.
Yeah.
Without talking about
it's beautiful buildings.
The thing is like because cancer strips you. It strips you of dignity. It strips you of confidence. It strips you of so many things. And coming into a space like that, because I hate hospitals. I know all of you do, but me, I hate the hospital, the ugly gowns. I hate all of, especially if you're going from one part of the hospital to another, and they're pushing you through all of that, and you're trying to protect your dignity. With your doctors, it's fine because I expose all the time to them because they see what strangers in the corridors. You're trying to cover yourself and everything, but there's something about that clinical, sterile, cold hospital thing that just makes you, that's just miserable. So, and because Maggie's is always next to the hospital, so when I leave the clinic and everything I come in, it's like a different world entirely, you know. And I had my favorite spot, literally, because I've been going to Maggie's since 2011. So this August will be 10 years. And literally, there were times when, after my sister died, there will be days when I'll just sit. They would understand, because there are days, because I talk to everybody all the time, a lot of the time, but there are days when I'll walk in and they know that, you know what, there's not going to be any talking today. I just go sit in my favorite spot, cry, or just stare into space for like hours. But that space, creating, I call it intentional architecture, with its power to soothe and heal. I cannot begin to tell you because our spaces matter. Our spaces impact us. The kind of spaces we have around us, it impacts our mental well-being. It impacts our emotional well-being. And because you walk in, I don't know about you guys, but when I walk, I remember, because when I started going to Maggie's in Swansea, they had a small makeshift cabin first. And when it was built, because you can walk in and the kitchen table, the conversations that happen on the kitchen, you meet different people, and that welcome, that, okay, you know what, you come in, you want a cup of tea, and they have all, because I love all sorts of tea, they will have, most of the time, they would have the kind of tea you want, no matter how fussy you are. And then that welcome, you get, because all of those things matter. They matter, because you feel heard, you are heard, and you feel understood, which is what everybody wants. Everybody wants to be heard. Everybody wants to be understood, you know? So that's the space that Maggie has curated is just amazing.
Peter, I don't know if there's anything.
Better, yeah.
I've got one last question, if that's okay with everyone. And it can be a very quick one, I promise, and then we can all go. I wondered if there was a piece of advice, or if there was some knowledge that you'd gained over your experience that you'd give to yourself back at your lower points or your more difficult points. What is the wisdom, I guess, that you've like accrued over time that you would hand back to yourself? I don't know if anyone wants to take that.
The cancer new normal. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Be kind to yourself. Because when you're used to being strong and trying to do everything all at once, it's easy to feel that your body is letting you down and want to beat yourself up about it. Especially because I remember, this is so funny. I remember when after I was diagnosed, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to run a marathon in XYZ number of years, blah, 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 and everything. And my breast care nurse said something. She said, look, just take it one day at a time. And then about years after the fact, I was just thinking, seriously, just be kind to yourself. It's a marathon. It isn't a sprint. After XYZ number of years of diagnosis, some people are climbing Mount Everest and all of that stuff, and you can just about manage walking around the block. Everybody's journey is different.
Mm-hmm.
So be kind to yourself.
I think, as Bami was saying about how I appreciate it, I mean, I feel that the gratitude for being reminded of living and not just whatever is happening or has happened about cancer and its consequences. I think that then just brings me back to gratitude for the friendship and companionship that I had with Alison for so many years, and in the last few years, the sort of guidance and the general atmosphere, and as Bami also describes, the architecture, the space to be grateful for what we had, and it continues to leave me feeling grateful for what I had with Alison over all those years. As we've all said, I mean, having a cancer diagnosis isn't a thing that any of us would wish upon ourselves or our nearest and dearest, but the amount that I've learnt about myself and life in general through that journey, and latterly the icing on the cake provided by Maggie's has been wonderful. So gratitude definitely is a large part which I would wish to convey.
I think I would, if I was looking back at myself to last year, I think what I'd say is take it day by day. Stop trying to look at it as a long thing. Somebody said to me, it's like it's a roller coaster. You don't want to get on the roller coaster, but then you don't want to get off it. So actually, that's the thing. I think take it day by day. Enjoy the little things. Enjoy the things. Actually, go back to, and I think cancer gives you that. As much as cancer takes away, cancer actually gives you that ability to look at your life and start to appreciate things that you didn't appreciate. You just let pass by because you were being stressed and you were living a life. And actually now I look at things and always have something to look forward to. It doesn't have to be in a long period, but have something, you can still do stuff and do what you can when you can and when you feel well enough, and set yourself little challenges, because actually sometimes you have to push yourself a bit, and you also have to recognize when you can't push yourself, and actually you just need to rest and accept where you're at. Acceptance is huge, I think. So that was quite a lot of advice for myself to take in. And breathe deeply when you're anxious. Take deep breaths. It helps no end. Don't do it in an MRI scanner, because then they say, okay, stop, your breathing's really funny. And then you have to stop breathing. So it becomes quite a nightmare. So don't do that.
That's great advice, and I've definitely been there. Yeah, and I think that's all wonderful things, and gratitude is such a nice note to end on. And related to that, I think I just say that accepting dependence on others and involving other people in what you're going through can be such a wonderful thing, whether that's friends or family or places like Maggie's and the groups and the staff there. I've actually formed so many rich, supportive, wonderful relationships as a consequence of having cancer. And I think that's only come because eventually I've learned how to accept that others can help me and to embrace that. And I think just going with that has, brought many wonderful things into my life.
Well, if ever there was a good final word, Ewan, I think you've given us it. So thank you very, very much. I'd just like to thank you all so much for your time and for your fantastic points on this discussion. I've definitely come away with a clear idea of what really matters when we're talking about mental health and living with cancer. And Bami, if it's okay with you, I'd really like to use your backpack metaphor in my
use it away, because I got it from one of the talks I gave. Somebody gave it, and I just found it so useful. So yeah.
Thank you. I'll credit you whenever I use it again.
Yeah.